So in yesterday's video, we learnt there is a dearth of educated men leading some women to frantically freeze their eggs until they can meet Mr. Right, or more accurately, Mr. Right Now That I'm Ready. So just to recap, this study showed that 81% of women that were choosing to freeze their eggs had graduate degrees and 99% had at least a bachelor's degree. Now, not surprisingly, this prompted many of you to ask the question, what exactly does it mean to be educated? There's no doubt that more women are gaining university degrees than men, but does that equal being educated? Well, certainly it's a type of education, but of course it depends on what you study and where you study. Is it a university that has drunk the social justice Kool-Aid? It's becoming increasingly difficult to find one that hasn't. Perhaps you think you'd be safe in a discipline like the law. Well, not so fast. How about math? Well, think again. Math is now an important part of social justice, apparently. And what about those eternally useful gender studies degrees? Well, let's listen to what Milo Yiannopoulos has to say on the topic.
Gender studies should be abolished in all publicly funded universities. Students who go to study gender studies, particularly at federal funded universities, come out dumber than when they went in. They come out believing lies. They come out with their critical faculties impaired, not improved. They come out more fragile than they arrived. They come out less able to have stable relationships with people, less able to cope in the world of work, less able to be functional, well-rounded human beings. Gender studies departments are damaging young people. They should be shut down.
Now, we know Milo tends to be a little over the top, so let's listen to what the ever-sensible Christina Hoff-Sommers has to say.
Well, okay, yeah. I would just suggest that some of you will think that we're overstating our position, and I suggest you watch a weekly video blog that I have called The Factual Feminist. And each week I try to, using the best sources I can, to tell the truth on gender issues, to correct myths, to correct hyperbole, and to suggest that this particular philosophy is not only in terms of the wage gap, not only does it misunderstand the wage gap, the typical teachings of gender study, and not only are you likely never to close the gap if you study something like that, but it's also, as Milo said, I see this very bitter, divisive, paranoid philosophy. It's ideology pretending to be scholarship. It's propaganda pretending to be fact. And history. And I urge some of the radicals in the room, because you're not always going to be radical. Some of you will change. Some of the best anti-Marxists were once Marxists, so I'm waiting for you to, emerge.
We'll take you in, don't worry.
We'll take you in. We're friendly. We're nice. We won't yell at you. But the thing is, a lot of you want to be, I see the passion and I see the earnestness, and you're young, you want to change the world, you want to do it now, and you're on the right side of justice, and you think that, but here's the thing, if you're on the right side of justice, history suggests you need a good grasp of reality. If you've got moral energy and you've got reality and truth, you will make progress. You'll be Martin Luther King, you'll be Gandhi, you'll be, the women's rights movement, they got the vote, and the second. But history also shows us a different kind of activism, where you have moral fervor and misinformation, moral fervor, propaganda. That is conducive to fanaticism. That is conducive to zealotry. And what I'm seeing on the campus and in this room tonight is the zealotry, the fanaticism, this eagerness to shut people down, this eagerness to silence, to censor. You've got to rethink it.
And obviously that doesn't just go for gender studies. But how about something like history? We often hear that students today don't know much of that. Here's Noel Ferguson on the decline of that discipline at university.
The data reveal a very big increase in the number of historians who specialise in women and gender, which has risen from 1% of the total to almost 10%. This is now the single most important historical subfield in the academy. Cultural history, from under 4% to nearly 8%, is next. The history of race and ethnicity has also gone up by a factor of more than 3. Environmental history is another big winner. The losers in this structural shift are diplomatic and international history, legal and constitutional history, and intellectual history. Social and economic history have also declined. All of these have fallen to less than half their 1970 shares of the profession. To understand why history is an academic discipline in decline, it's worth looking at some of the courses that are available at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale this fall. Are you sitting comfortably? Take, for example, Harvard's History 1954, Emotions in History. The course description is as follows. What is the place of emotion in history? We will explore some possible analytic frames for the history of emotion and debates over the subjectivity of history, and consider their application to case studies drawn from Australian history. Now, it strikes me as not wholly surprising that this course has, according to the My Harvard site, a total enrollment of 1. Or consider the following course titles available at Yale. History 4XXJ, Indigenous Religious Histories. History 1XXJ, Witchcraft and Society in Colonial America. History 283, History of the Supernatural. History 260J, Sex, Life and Generation. All fascinating, no doubt. But as my doctoral advisor invariably asked whenever I proposed a dissertation topic, so what? Stanford's History 41Q is entitled Mad Women, the History of Women and Mental Illness in the US. It entices potential students by proposing to, and I quote, explore how gender has shaped the experience and treatment of mental illness in US history, and asking the question, why have women been the witches and hysterics of the past? Think about that for a minute, because I don't think men can be witches or hysterics, can they? Now, this is not to say that it's a silly question, just that it's a less important question than how the United States became an independent republic with a constitution based on the idea of limited government, or how it survived a civil war over the institution of slavery. It just seems less important than that.
Jordan Peterson has stated that universities are potentially doing more harm than good, particularly in the humanities, and that parents would be better off sending their kids to trade schools. Now, obviously, not all fields of study are infected with this kind of stuff, but the point here is that a university education may not be all that it's cracked up to be these days, and may not be the best criteria for judging potential partners. So with that in mind, I thought I'd present a picture of what disciplines men and women are choosing to get their educations in the US today. And for this, I'm going to use data from the National Centre for Education Statistics. Now, whilst they have data on the number of degrees at every level, bachelor, masters and doctorates, they only have the gender split for bachelor's degrees, which account for about 2/3 of all degrees obtained in 2014-15, the last year data was available. So in 2014-15, 57% of bachelor's degrees went to women. That amounts to about 270,000 more bachelor's degrees awarded to women than men. Now, I'm not going to go through every field of study, just those that show the biggest differences between men and women. And firstly, those in which women significantly outnumber men. So going alphabetically, first up is area, ethnic, cultural, gender and group studies. I know, I guess the good part about this is that less than 8,000 degrees, or less than 1/2% of all degrees were given out for these fields, but still women outnumber men more than 2-1. Next, biological and biomedical science, almost 20,000 more degrees awarded to women. Communication, journalism and related programs, women outnumber men almost 2 to 1. Unfortunately, given the decline of that industry, I'm not sure what your prospects are. English language and literature, again, women outnumber men more than 2 to 1. Family and consumer sciences / human sciences, more than 7 women for every male. Foreign languages and literature and linguistics, almost 70% female dominated. Health professions and related programs shows that almost 150,000 more degrees were awarded to women than men in 2014-15. More than double the number of females than males are getting legal degrees. More than 60% of liberal arts, sciences, general studies and humanities degrees were awarded to women. And of course, psychology is dominated by women, outnumbering men by more than 3 to 1. Those oh-so-useful future public servants are destined to be more than 80% women. And last but not least, about 20,000 more women are gaining degrees in those very useful visual and performing arts. Now, of course, in some areas, men still dominate, so let's have a look at those. Men are still getting more business degrees, but not by much, about 53% of the total. Men are still getting more than 80% of the computer information degrees, despite the Silicon Valley push for diversity. Engineering degrees still go to men by a ratio of about 4 to 1. Homeland security, law enforcement and firefighting is closer than I would have thought, but then again, you don't necessarily need a degree to go into that line of work. Mathematics and statistics is still majority male. Physical science and science and technologies are predominantly male. And despite the changing face of history, 60% of those degrees are still going to men. So what does this tell us? Well, firstly, I think it tells us that the educational choices women make are not necessarily helping them to close the earnings gap, which should be distinguished from the non-existent wage gap. And of course, there are plenty of jobs that men perform, like certain trades, that'll be paid better than a degree in, say, gender studies or public administration. And back to the original question of what does it mean to be educated? Well, to be educated is not the same as being smart. Certainly there are plenty of women undertaking difficult and challenging fields of study, but they also dominate in what we might call the less taxing disciplines. And so the dearth of educated men that was posited in the original article doesn't appear to be a sufficient explanation. As was shown yesterday, women think that a partner with a steady job is much more important than someone with the same level of education. But if a degree-carrying male is part of the status package that women covet in men, then it's just a basic mathematical truth that there are going to be less eligible men by those standards given current trends in education. And remember, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, or even consider supporting the channel via Patreon. See you next time.